Hello and welcome to the AIM webinar series. AIM is an alliance enabling the cooperation, development, and standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to IoT, AIM's your advocate. Any organization with an interest in data collection is a beneficiary of these efforts. Membership provides an opportunity to influence the direction of the industry, develop policies and standards, access market reports, and engage new partners. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. First is the AIM antitrust policy. It's a policy of aiming to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. And then our collaboration and work product policy states that presentations and webinars like today's are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. You will also notice that you are muted. You will be muted throughout the webinar, but if you have any questions, you can send those to me through the Q&A option, which is located at the bottom of your application screen. We'll answer questions at the end of the webinar. Also, this webinar will be recorded and you'll be emailed when it is available. Today, we are excited to welcome TK Prasad, a professor with the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Wright State University. Today, he'll be discussing insightful data analytics and applications. TK, welcome and take it away.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much for the audience to join in. My goal today is essentially to present research and development work we have done over the last decade at Noesis Center and in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. So what I'm going to do is to provide a very high level, shallow view, but broad view of the kinds of topics and applications and technologies we have dealt with. And subsequently, I'm going to go a little more in depth in the kinds of doctoral dissertations our students have written to give you a broader view of the kinds of research that we have done. So without any further ado, let me start with. So broadly speaking, you can characterize the work we have done as falling into big data analytics. And in particular, we have tried to address volume, velocity, variety, and veracity challenges. And basically try to develop techniques to derive values to provide actionable insights and decisions. So to just give you a broad view of the application areas we have dealt with, we have worked on disaster analytics and response, and this particular work was done in the context of flood events, and this work was supported by NSF and done in conjunction with Ohio State. We have work on the medical informatics and digital health, and specifically targeting pediatric asthma. And this work was funded by NIH and was done in collaboration with Dayton Children's. We have some work on road traffic analytics, and here our goal was to understand and figure out the reasons for congestion, and we looked at Bay Area traffic network data. Our work on mental health surveillance essentially involved trying to glean depression symptoms and suicidal tendencies using data that was volunteered by people on Reddit. More recently, our students have been working on scientific literature summarization, specifically targeting the Microsoft Academic Graph, and also in the area of named entity recognition, which has broad application. Now, in terms of the kinds of data that we have looked at, we have analyzed social media data, specifically from Twitter and Reddit, primarily because they are publicly available. And furthermore, Reddit is also anonymized. So that helped us quite a lot in terms of mitigating privacy concerns and things of that sort. In terms of text analytics, we have dealt with electronic medical records, news articles, research articles, and things like that. In the context of sensor data analytics, we have dealt with weather data, traffic data, data from wearables. In the recent past, we have done some work on image analysis, and I'm going to share with you examples of each of these as I delve deeper into what we have been up to. Now, broadly speaking, our strength has been in trying to hybridize different approaches that have been reported in the literature. So specifically, we have tried to combine data-driven deep learning and statistical models with knowledge-based approaches, specifically using semantic web technologies. And more recently, we have tried to hybridize these by using well-curated resources such as lexicons to actually try to annotate training data, which can then be used to develop rich deep learning models. So again, I'll try to kind of share with you more details in what follows. So now my goal is to basically look at some concrete application areas and then share with you exactly what we accomplished, and through that convey how we use different data modalities and how we integrated these things. So in the context of disaster management, we essentially collected witness-reported tweets about flooding events. So we crawled tweets from areas affected by floods. Specifically, we have looked at data from Louisiana floods, Houston floods, Chennai floods. And then we also looked at crowd-curated open street maps that allowed us information about location names and their lat longs, and then satellite imagery. So using these kinds of information, we try to put them together to obtain situational awareness. So specifically, we extracted temporal information, which was relatively straightforward. We extracted location information, which was harder to get, primarily because the location is not made public by all the folks who are reporting. And so we had some very interesting work on location extraction from tweets. And then we also had domain models that allowed us to glean information about the flood-specific data. And so trying to collect the tweet information and do spatio-temporal thematic analysis to eventually present this information on a map. And that situational awareness can help eventually match the help seekers from help providers, as one example. Now, subsequently, we also looked at the images shared about the event. And specifically, we worked on information extraction from images and then present all of this on a map for people to take actions. And again, I'm going to show you some concrete examples in the next few slides. Now, in terms of the research and development work, we had to develop crawlers that were very effective and focused, and so that we could basically get relevant information with high signal to noise ratio. So we used domain lexicons and other techniques and kept monitoring the crawls and update the crawlers to basically get better quality information. We did a lot of work on spatio-temporal thematic analysis to understand what was going on at a particular situation and see how things were evolving. And like I said, this kind of information can provide us enough information to match help seekers with help providers. Now, in terms of the kind of PhD work this task motivated, we basically looked at tweets that were generated by witnesses who used to use basically casual language to describe locations. And our goal was to try to extract the location information, try to get the standard name for these locations or landmarks, and then try to eventually obtain the lat-long kind of information, which will help us actually provide help or better understand what's going on where. So this actually led to a dissertation and a specific paper that involved using a gazetteer, requiring us to develop a gazetteer-based statistical language model specifically based on OpenStreetMap to essentially try to delimit the location mentions and map it to the full location name and the lat-long. Follow-up work also led to image analysis. So in particular, we try to develop classifiers that would, for example, separate flooding event related images from others. And we had to deal with some false positives, such as images of the beach or image of a swimming pool and things like that. We then built on this and tried to develop a refinement that also identifies, say, vehicles which were submerged in water and things like that. And also try to glean, say, water depth from these images based on typical height or length information of other objects that we could spot in these images. Now, switching to a different application, in the context of mobile health, we basically focused on pediatric asthma. So our goal was to develop a system that collected a lot of data relevant to asthma about a pediatric patient. So in particular, we try to get weather and environment data from web services. We try to provide the pediatric patient sensors like peak flow meter and Fitbit to give their patient-generated data. We also had an app where the patient could report their medication intake, the kinds of symptoms they had, such as coughing and wheezing, and how many times per day or when that happened. We also collected information about the home environment by providing FooBot, and using all this multimodal comprehensive information, we try to better understand if we could correlate the causes of asthma or allergy to the symptoms that we saw. So we built a dashboard which would try to show us all this information in a way that we could try to make sense of. We believe that continuous monitoring like this would be an improvement over less frequent interaction between the patient and the clinician, which just takes place in the hospital, as opposed to sort of focusing on the home environment where we may be able to actually find the true causes of the problem. In fact, an interesting finding through this monitoring was that we were able to relate poor asthma control to actually poor medication adherence. The entire study was done with about 200 children consented for the study, and we had completed about 150 patients through this process. Now, in terms of the nature of a PhD topic that came out of this line of work, we essentially developed a system and an algorithm that would map low-level signals and data to high-level abstractions that would be easier for, that would be more accessible to humans. And if you have multiple explanations, we also developed a way to discriminate and figure out what else should we look for in the data, or what else should we try to search and monitor in order to disambiguate, which will eventually allow us to actually take action. So this entire perception cycle was a model that we were able to develop. And then we implemented this using semantic web technology and reusable building blocks on a desktop. And it turned out that that implementation worked very well on a desktop. But when we moved the same thing to a mobile phone, unfortunately, it could not run because of resource constraints. So what we had to do was to go back to the drawing board and develop a customized, efficient bit vector-based approach to this particular reasoning. And it turned out that the algorithms that we developed made significant impact on what we could do on the mobile phone. So the time reduced from hundreds of seconds to milliseconds. The problem instances that we could solve went up in ways that the problems of interest, problem sizes of interest, which we could not do earlier, now became feasible. And in fact, even we had improvement in terms of the asymptotic complexity of the algorithms that we were able to develop. Now, just to give you a different application of some of the work that we have done that involves both data-driven approach and development of statistical models, we looked at the Bay Area traffic network. But just to clarify what our goals were, I'm going to take a slightly different example. So our goal was to use the traffic data to basically first see where, for example, congestion occurred. Now, we also were interested in figuring out what was the reason for the congestion. And for doing that, we looked at information from a different modality, but reporting information about the same location around the same time. So for example, as this example shows, we could find that the overturned semi was a reason for the traffic congestion. And if you are concerned about the reliability of Twitter as a source of information, we can go and look at other more reliable sources which may report the same information with some delay. So the overall problem that we dealt with was try to first detect traffic anomalies and then try to explain why that happens. Now here, the key issue was, how do we define anomaly? So that begs the question, how do we define what a normal traffic is at a given location at a given time? So that led us to basically develop a bunch of statistical models using data for a whole year from Bay Area traffic network. So what we observed was that the traffic is a function of the time of the day of the week. And so we essentially developed for every hour of the day and for every day of the week, we developed a separate normalcy model. And we did this by using data from one year. And this particular thing was implemented on a Spark-based system. So the key research topic was defining normalcy, and then use that to detect anomaly. And then for a given spatiotemporal context, if we detected anomalous traffic, we try to seek information from other sources such as tweets to see if we can explain the reason for this anomaly. And so trying to collect information from multiple sources and tying them together allowed us to have a much better situational awareness of what was going on. And so this was a non-trivial work that led to a PhD dissertation. Now, whatever I just described in some detail is actually can be turned into a framework that can be reused in multiple application areas. So for example, the idea of abstracting machine-sensed data to human comprehensible features and then use that to drive your decision is commonplace in many areas. And we were able to actually demonstrate or experiment in many in terms of in using different applications, such as in the context of weather, you can obtain temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind speed, this kind of information, and use the rules that NOAA provides to determine whether there's a blizzard or a flurry or a rainstorm, and then try to act accordingly. Similarly, we also played around with a Kaggle data set where we had data about Parkinson's patient who were outfitted with mobile phones who reported data from accelerometer, GPS, compass, microphone, and things like that. And we could analyze that data to learn about to abstract it into features that is human accessible, such as tremors and falls and disturbed sleep and slurred speech and things like that, which can eventually help us both diagnose the problem and monitor disease progression. So we basically found that the generic framework that we developed actually allowed us to better analyze, understand, and formulate the solutions in many different areas. So going forward, what I truly believe is that we should be able to amalgamate or hybridize the data-driven AI and machine learning models with knowledge-based reasoning like what is depicted on this picture. So in particular, we can do low-level sensing and collect low-level data, use the data-driven neural network or deep learning models or statistical reasoning to extract features, and then use those features to basically drive knowledge-based or symbolic reasoning to eventually help us make decisions and take action. So going forward, I would like to sort of take this broad architecture and try to hybridize the various techniques that have evolved over the last few decades. In the context of mental health surveillance, we have been playing around with data from subreddits. And we've been able to glean depression symptoms sort of aligned with PHQ-9 sort of questionnaires, or suicidality, again, aligned with the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, to better understand the self-volunteered data on places like Reddit, which are anonymized. So we are getting, in some sense, unvarnished self-volunteer data, which are anonymized. So we are able to better understand what people are going through without them being concerned about the social stigma, and better understand what people go through, so that the clinician can eventually benefit from what to do about such cases when they run into them in their patient population. In the recent past, some of our students have started working in the area of abstractive summarization of technical literature. And so I'm just going to mention 3 ideas that we are exploring. So one is, given a field of study, we collect a bunch of related documents, and we can basically overcome the information load by trying to summarize a collection of documents based on the topical similarity. And we enhanced this approach by using citation driven summarization, where we also looked at the viewpoint of people who were reading this information and summarizing it in a way that made sense, or that was applicable in a different context. So using cite answers to further enhance the summaries helped us improve the summary. And then to make it more comprehensive, we also used entity-aware information to make the summary more comprehensive. So we used biomedical articles from PubMed to experiment with these kinds of techniques. We have also, another graduate student has also looked at named entity extraction, and in particular use domain lexicons to basically annotate training data that can eventually be used for named entity extraction, and with specific emphasis on extracting disease mentions or chemical mentions and things like that. I have particular interest going forward in studying trust in the context of human AI collaborative systems. So in the past, I have worked on trust, but I would like to explore this area also going forward. And specifically, I'm interested in developing architecture that hybridizes humans and AI agents in such a way that we benefit from the strengths of both and mitigate the weaknesses of both. So I have some anecdotal, historically significant examples, but I have not done any concrete formal work on this yet. So just to sort of end, here are some key references that give you a summative view of the kinds of issues that we have dealt with. So the very first reference is a reasonably well-received tutorial that I have given several times. The second paper is the one that is associated with the tutorial. And then we have two additional broad papers that describe our work on machine perception that I talked about. And the last one is how do we hybridize the machine learning models and knowledge models. So with that, I want to actually stop. I do realize that I gave a very high level view, practically bordering name dropping, with the assurance that we have lots of publications with all the gory details in the literature. And so if you have any interest in exploring any of these topics, I'll be very happy to point you to the literature from our group and also provide more information based on your interest. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll welcome any questions you may have.
Yep. Thank you for the information. So we do have some questions here, and you can still provide some questions if you'd like by just going to the bottom of your application screen. There's a Q&A option. You can submit those over to us, and you can chat those as well. First question we have is, can you expand on or illustrate the application areas or the nature of the approaches?
For what? I didn't follow the last part.
Yeah, can you expand on or illustrate the applications areas or the nature of the hybrid approaches that combine data and symbolic information?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so essentially, let me sort of share with you three different ways that we have tried to do it. So let me start from the most recent one, which is in the context of named entity extraction. So for example, if you want to extract biomedical information, we have well-developed domain lexicons that have highly precise phrases in the medical domain. And but these are high in precision but low in recall. And so one of our goals has been to use this to basically annotate training data, which will then give us the context or patterns in the data that can allow us to further expand the dictionary and use that to drive supervised learning and machine models. So we combined the lexicon and the data-driven models to eventually get better classifiers. In the context of the machine perception, we used low-level data to provide, abstracting low-level data to provide high-level abstractions, such as human accessible features, which can then be used as a part of the decision rules to make decisions and take actions.
Thank you. Given the difficulty in getting health data, what sort of sources did you use for acquiring them in your work?
Yeah, so in fact, what we found was that some of our collaborations actually were driven by looking for these kinds of hard to get medical data. So we collaborated with Dayton Children's, where they were responsible for handling all the patient specific data while providing us with the anonymized version of that. So they were aware of who the patients were, but we were given the data without any, after scrubbing the patient information. So that was one place where we had very rich collaboration, where they provided the actual human subjects information while we worked on the analytics. Another place where we benefited from this kind of collaboration is where we worked with Weill Cornell in the context of the depression and suicidality work. So they have information about the depression in the context of New York State. And so what we did was they worked with the electronic medical records, and we worked with Twitter data for the same geographic locations to sort of synthesize complementary information from two different sources and tie it together. So again, we did not have access to EHR data that they had access to. And this collaboration turned out to be a win-win for both, because we had a pretty good command of social media analytics, while they had a nice set of data that they could not share with us because it could not cross the state boundaries.
Great, thank you. And just wondering, some people were wondering, what are your next steps with these projects? Are there next steps moving forward to further develop them?
Yeah, so right now I have I'm co-advising two doctoral students. So one of them is working on abstractive summarization work. Another student is working on named entity extraction. The third topic that interests me, and I'm kind of in the reading mode, is to make machine learning models more understandable and to improve our trust or confidence in them. So the keyword that we see in the literature is explainability and interpretability. That is how, so a lot of times what I have found is that machine learning models sometimes give wrong answers. In some other situations, they give right answers for the wrong reasons. And then there is a third case where they give right answers for the right reasons. So in order to improve our confidence, I want to be able to make sure I can distinguish between right answers for the wrong reasons and right answers for the right reasons. And so I want to better understand what's going on within the black box. And so we are trying to look at, so there is a lot of work in the recent past. I'm trying to kind of understand that so that we can improve our confidence in this. And the other area that I just sort of mentioned is the human AI collaborative systems. So I want to see what happens when, like, how do we make, basically exploit the strengths of the both to remediate the weaknesses in both. And so that is another, so I have a lot of work in the context of trust in terms of sensor networks and social networks and things like that. But now I want to actually try to see how those concepts translate in this combined framework.
Great, thank you. And I know this question may be somewhat similar, but they're just wondering through the process of doing these, doing the research, was there anything that surprised you? Anything you had to troubleshoot that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, actually, it's pretty interesting. So some of the things that were surprising, for example, in our work on say depression and suicidality and things like that, I was actually surprised how much information people actually volunteer on these social media websites. And maybe under the protection of anonymization, but even on Twitter, people actually try to make public things that I would normally have not expected. And the other issue that we felt was, so this is a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, we had a lot of difficulty trying to make sure that privacy and other things are guarded. So in practice, those issues take a lot more effort and time than we had anticipated. But on the other hand, I feel good because we feel that we do take privacy and other issues very seriously, just to make sure that everybody is protected as best as we can.
Great. Well, that looks to wrap up our questions for today. Thank you again for your time and your insights. Greatly appreciated. And thanks to the audience again for their active participation.
Hey, thank you very much for all your help. I truly enjoyed this, preparing this talk and sharing with you what we have done.
Great. Thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.